The wind howled across the icy plains, carrying snow like a furious white river that blurred the horizon. Inside a small, weather-beaten hut, Jonas worked quickly, hammering a wooden panel to cover a broken window. The storm outside was one of the worst he had faced in years on this remote planet, a world of frost and bitter cold, where survival depended on skill and vigilance. He shivered as the wind tore through the cracks, rattling the walls, but he focused on the work. Heat from the small stove offered little comfort against the bitter chill that seeped through every layer of clothing. Jonas had chosen this place for its isolation. Far from any settlements or patrol routes, the frozen plains offered safety, a chance to live in solitude where he could hunt, explore, and observe. Most humans would have considered this madness, but Jonas thrived in it. He understood the planet's dangers, respected the storms, and trusted his instincts. He had faced blizzards before, had been trapped in storms for days, and survived. Yet, tonight felt different. The wind had a strange, almost restless quality, as if it carried a warning. A faint sound reached him through the roar of the storm, a muffled cry that made his heart skip. He paused, straining his ears. The sound came again, weaker this time, and clearly not human. He stepped outside cautiously, snow crunching under his boots, and peered into the white void. The blizzard blinded him, yet something moved, a small, trembling figure staggering against the wind. Jonas didn't hesitate. He grabbed a thick blanket from inside, wrapped it around his shoulders, and plunged into the storm. The figure was closer now, revealed in flashes of snow-laden gusts. She was unlike any human he had ever seen. Her skin shimmered faintly under the storm's faint light, a delicate pale blue that seemed to glow when the wind exposed it. Her eyes were large, dark, and filled with fear. She moved clumsily in the deep snow, her lithe form struggling against the storm. Jonas could see she was exhausted, barely able to lift her legs. Something in her movements spoke of desperation, as if she were fleeing from danger he could not yet see. "Hey, hold on!" he shouted, though he knew she might not understand. He ran forward, tossing the blanket toward her. It landed near her feet. She froze, her eyes widening in terror, and stumbled backward. Jonas slowed, keeping his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "I won't hurt you," he called again, his voice steady, but calm. He had no idea if she could even hear him over the blizzard, or if she would trust him. But he could not leave her there, not in the storm that could kill in minutes. Finally, she took a trembling step forward. Then another, her body trembling not just from cold but from fear. Jonas knelt and held out his hand, careful to look non-threatening. She hesitated, then, driven by exhaustion and the bitter cold, accepted it. Her grip was surprisingly delicate, yet firm, and he helped her stumble the last few feet into the safety of the hut. Once inside, he slammed the door against the wind and bolted it, cutting off the roar outside. The sudden warmth of the stove hit her like a wave, and she shivered violently. Jonas pulled off his snow-drenched outer layer and draped the blanket over her shoulders. She sank to the floor, knees drawn to her chest, staring at him with wide, fearful eyes. He could see the frost clinging to her thin clothing, and realized she would not last long in this storm without immediate warmth. He knelt beside her, careful not to appear threatening. "You're safe here," he said softly, though she didn't respond. Instead, she turned slightly away, as if trying to make herself smaller, to disappear from his sight. Jonas studied her, trying to understand her strange physiology. Her skin glowed faintly in the firelight, and her eyes reflected intelligence and fear in equal measure. Her hair was long, flowing, with a color he could not name, somewhere between silver and pale green, shifting in the firelight. He noticed small markings along her arms, intricate patterns that seemed natural, not clothing. Whatever she was clearly not from this world, or at least not from any human settlement he had encountered. He moved to stoke the fire, carefully avoiding sudden movements. The alien woman flinched at every sound, every shadow. He set a pot of water on the stove to heat, and fetched some rations from a shelf. Simple food, he thought, something easy on her stomach. He placed it near her, letting it slide gently across the floor toward her. She watched it suspiciously, her eyes flicking between him and the food. Hunger finally overcame caution, and she reached out with trembling hands to take it. Eating slowly, cautiously, Jonas spoke again, in calm, broken phrases, pointing to himself. "Jonas. You. Safe. You. Cold." He gestured at her, trembling. She made a low, strange sound, not a word, but it was something like acknowledgement. He realized they could not communicate easily. Yet they were communicating still. Actions, gestures, care, these were languages they both understood. Trust could be built without words. The alien woman eventually leaned back against the wall, exhaustion overtaking fear, and Jonas saw her eyes flutter closed. He kept watch over her, his thoughts racing. Why was she alone? Why did she flee? And what danger was she escaping from that made her fear a human so intensely? The storm outside continued to rage. But inside, in the fragile glow of firelight, there was a tentative calm. He could not know if she would stay, but for now, she had nowhere else to go. Jonas pulled an extra blanket from a shelf and draped it over her shoulders, covering her shivering form. The weight of her fear was almost tangible, but so was her fragile trust. He decided not to push, not to force her to speak or explain. Patience would be the bridge. He tended the fire, made the room warmer, and prepared a bed of thick blankets on the floor for her to rest. She accepted it with a small, cautious nod. Hours passed. The storm outside showed no sign of letting up. Yet inside the hut, a silent bond was forming. The alien woman, still tense and alert, had begun to study him with curiosity. She watched his movements, the way he carefully stoked the fire, prepared food, and arranged blankets. There was no malice, only care. Her instincts warred with the evidence of his actions, and slowly, cautiously, she began to relax, if only slightly. Jonas sat nearby, keeping his eyes on her, yet giving her space. He knew that trust was not demanded, it was earned. The alien's breathing evened out, and the faint glow from her skin softened, reflecting the warmth of the fire. The storm outside continued its furious dance, but inside, a fragile peace had begun to settle. He did not yet know her story, her purpose, or the reason for her terror, but he knew one thing. He would protect her, at least until the storm passed. Night deepened. The wind roared against the walls, and the snow piled high against the door. Jonas kept vigil, listening to the storm and watching the alien woman, who had curled up on the blankets, still shivering but slowly relaxing. There was a strange beauty in her presence, something ethereal and foreign, yet undeniably alive and intelligent. He could sense a story behind those wide, dark eyes, a story of flight, fear, and survival. He thought about what tomorrow would bring. The storm would end eventually, and then they would have to face the world outside. But for tonight, the two of them shared the same shelter, the same fire, and the same fragile thread of trust. The alien woman, terrified when she first saw him, had allowed herself to be saved. That small act of courage and trust spoke more than any words could. Jonas knew this was the beginning of something unexpected, a story neither of them could yet understand. And so, as the blizzard raged and the night deepened, Jonas kept watch. Outside, the world was a frozen, white chaos. Inside, a human and an alien, from two different worlds, shared warmth, protection, and the first quiet step toward understanding. The night was long, the storm relentless. Yet in that small hut, hope flickered like the firelight dancing on her shimmering skin. The blizzard continued to rage outside the small hut, a white wall of snow and wind that threatened to swallow the world beyond its thin wooden walls. Inside, The warmth of the fire contrasted sharply with the frozen chaos outside. The alien woman, still trembling, sat near the hearth, her eyes wide and wary. She studied every movement of the human carefully, as if trying to understand him while guarding herself against any sudden threat. He moved quietly around the small space, bringing her a cup of steaming liquid and setting it down on a small wooden table near her. She hesitated, glancing at him, then at the cup. The smell was unfamiliar, but something in the warmth made her take it, her hands slightly shaking. The liquid soothed her throat and eased some of the tension in her muscles. She let out a small sound, neither human nor alien, but one that conveyed relief. He smiled gently, understanding in the simplest way possible that she accepted his help. He sat across from her, careful not to make any sudden movements, watching her reactions. They didn't speak the same language, and words were of little use, but he knew that trust was built in small acts. Offering warmth, food, and safety could speak louder than any sentence. Time passed slowly, marked only by the crackling fire and the roaring blizzard outside. The alien woman began to observe him more openly. She saw the way he moved with care, how he adjusted the fire to avoid burning her, how he treated the small space as though it were a place of protection rather than mere shelter. She noticed the marks on his hands, the calluses and small scars that told of a life lived with effort and challenge. Slowly, a spark of curiosity began to replace her fear. He noticed too. He saw the way her gaze lingered on him, even when she pretended not to watch. He could tell she was analyzing him, trying to understand if he posed danger or if he could be trusted. Patience, he reminded himself silently. Patience would be the key to earning her confidence. To help her understand, he began using gestures. He pointed to himself and said his name. Then he pointed to her and waited. She hesitated, but eventually repeated the sound he had used, awkwardly trying to imitate it. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Communication would be slow, but it could happen. He fetched a blanket and draped it over her shoulders, demonstrating care without forcing it. She stiffened at first, her muscles taut with tension, but the warmth was undeniable, and eventually, she relaxed just enough to allow him to adjust the blanket so it covered her more fully. A small nod, almost imperceptible, told him she was beginning to accept his presence. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of ending. Outside, the wind shrieked like a living creature, and the snow piled higher against the hut's walls. Inside, the alien woman began to move a little closer to the fire, drawn by its light and warmth. She lifted her hands toward the flames, as though trying to absorb their comfort. The human watched, fascinated by the delicate motions of her fingers, the alien grace in her movements. He wondered at the biology he didn't fully understand, at the way her skin seemed to shimmer slightly in the firelight, reflecting colors he couldn't name. He decided it was time to offer something more, a way to bridge the gap between them. He brought over a small piece of food, simple and safe. A flat, soft bread he had baked earlier. He placed it on the table in front of her and gestured for her to eat. She froze, then looked at him, then back at the bread. He nodded encouragingly, and after a long pause, she took a small bite. Her eyes widened slightly, and a sound of surprise escaped her. The taste was new, yet comforting. She ate slowly, carefully, and he allowed her the time she needed, never pushing or forcing. As she ate, he began to observe her more closely. The markings on her skin caught his eye again, glowing faintly in the firelight. They were beautiful, intricate, and suggested more than mere decoration. He wondered what they meant, rank, status, or something else entirely. She noticed him staring and pulled back slightly, her eyes sharp with alertness. He raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, showing he meant no harm. She relaxed a fraction, her curiosity battling with instinctive caution. The alien woman began to mimic some of his actions. She poured a small sip of liquid into a bowl for herself, following the motions he had demonstrated. She laughed softly at her own clumsiness, a sound like wind chimes in a soft breeze. He smiled at her, delighted by the small breakthrough. A bond, however fragile, was beginning to form. They did not speak words yet, but there was understanding. Through gestures, expressions, and small shared actions, they began to communicate. He pointed to the window, then to the snow outside, indicating the storm. She nodded, understanding that they were trapped together for now. He pointed to the fire, then to her, inviting her to move closer. She hesitated, then stepped forward, allowing herself to feel warmth without fear. Night fell, and the fire cast long shadows across the room. The alien woman curled slightly, using the blanket he had offered as a shield against both the cold and the unknown. The human continued to maintain the fire, careful to keep it at the perfect temperature, demonstrating consistency and safety. She watched him, her wide eyes filled with cautious interest. She was beginning to trust him, though she would never admit it aloud. He decided to teach her something else, a simple game of hand gestures. He moved his fingers in a pattern, then encouraged her to imitate. She watched closely, then tried to copy his movements. They laughed together when her attempts were awkward, a sound of joy and amusement that transcended language. For the first time, she allowed herself to enjoy a moment without fear, a brief respite from the terror of the storm and the unknown. As the hours passed, she began to share more about herself, in fragments and gestures. She indicated a journey she had been on, pointing to herself, then to the sky, and then to the ground. He nodded, piecing together the story. She had traveled far, fleeing some danger he did not yet understand. She paused, glancing at him with wide eyes, asking without words if he could help. He nodded gently, understanding the request. He could not explain how or why, but he knew he would do what he could. The night was long, but the fire and their tentative connection kept fear at bay. The storm outside was relentless, but inside the hut, there was a fragile safety. The alien woman began to relax, her movements less stiff, her eyes less wary. She allowed him to adjust the blanket over her once more, a silent acknowledgement of trust. Toward morning, the wind began to die down, and the snow drifted into softer shapes outside. The alien woman moved closer to the fire, her back to the wall, eyes fixed on the flames. The human sat nearby, keeping watch, ready to respond to any sudden threat. They did not speak, but there was a sense of companionship forming, a bridge of understanding built from patience, care, and shared survival. He glanced at her glowing markings again, now more intrigued than ever. Whatever her origin, whatever her mission, she was here now, relying on him as much as he relied on her presence to ease the long night. He wondered what dangers awaited once the storm cleared. But for now, in the flickering firelight, there was peace, a moment of quiet alliance between two beings from different worlds. The alien woman, for the first time, allowed herself a brief smile. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. She was beginning to see that he was not a threat, that perhaps humans could be allies, not enemies. He returned the smile, nodding slightly, as if to say, "We will face whatever comes next together." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the hut, a fragile trust had been forged. They had survived the night, learned to communicate in small ways, and shared the first moments of understanding that could lead to something far greater. As the dawn light filtered through the snow-covered window, the alien woman glanced at him once more, not with fear, but with cautious curiosity. The human knew that the real challenge was yet to come. The storm was only a beginning, a prelude to the dangers that awaited beyond the hut. But he also knew that together, they had begun a connection that could overcome fear, distance, and difference. And for the first time, the alien woman felt that perhaps survival was not only about escaping danger, it could also be about finding trust, and maybe even friendship, in the unlikeliest of places. The storm had finally begun to ease, though the world outside was still buried in deep snow and ice. The human surveyed the horizon through the frost-covered window, noting the pale light of dawn filtering weakly through the clouds. The blizzard's fury had passed, but its aftermath left the planet in a frozen silence, broken only by the occasional howl of the wind over distant ridges. The alien woman watched him from across the room, wrapped tightly in the blanket he had offered her. Her eyes were still wide with caution, but there was a glimmer of curiosity now, a sense that perhaps the danger had passed, at least for a time. She shifted slightly, testing her strength after the long night, and he noticed. "You're stronger than you look," he said gently, nodding at her as he pointed toward the door. His words were simple, but his tone carried reassurance. He meant no pressure, only a suggestion. The world outside was dangerous, and they would need to leave soon if they were to survive together. She hesitated, looking at the door, then back at him. Fear still lingered in her eyes, but it was tempered by the memory of his care through the night. Slowly, she nodded, indicating that she understood. Together, they began preparing to leave the small hut. He handed her a small pack with supplies, some of the flat bread he had baked, a small container of water, and a few tools he thought might be useful outside. She took it cautiously, examining each item with fascination. Some she recognized, some she did not. But the gesture of offering her these tools impressed her. It showed she was not being treated as a stranger or a captive, but as someone whose survival mattered. Outside, the snow stretched endlessly, a blinding white expanse that threatened to erase all sense of direction. The alien woman stepped cautiously, testing the stability of the ice beneath her feet. He followed closely, adjusting his pace to hers. The air was sharp, cold against their skin and scales alike, and the wind still carried a bite, despite the blizzard's passing. "We need shelter," he said, pointing toward a distant ridge where rocky formations might provide cover. She followed his gestures, understanding the meaning without words. Together, they moved through the snow, careful with each step, sharing small glances to make sure the other was keeping pace. As they walked, she finally spoke in her own language, a series of soft, flowing sounds that carried a musical quality. He listened carefully, picking out the tone, the emotion behind the words. Though he could not understand her fully, the urgency in her voice was clear. She was warning him of something, or perhaps describing the journey she had endured before finding him. He nodded, indicating he understood her concern. Then, in the distance, movement caught her attention. Shadows shifted against the white backdrop, shapes that did not belong to the storm. She stiffened, her instincts screaming caution. The human glanced in the direction she was watching and saw the faint outlines of patrol drones, small, mechanical beings moving systematically through the snow, scanning the area. "They're looking for you," he said quietly, using gestures to indicate the danger. Her eyes widened, and she stepped closer to him, instinctively seeking protection. He understood immediately. She could face capture, or worse if the patrols found her. He assessed the situation quickly. They could not outrun the drones across the open snow. They would be detected immediately. But the rocky ridge offered cover, a chance to hide and observe. He led her swiftly toward it, signaling her to stay low and move quietly. She complied, her trust in him growing despite the lingering fear. The ridge proved a temporary sanctuary. Behind the rocks, they crouched, watching the patrols sweep past in their mechanical search. The alien woman whispered softly, her voice a mix of fear and awe, describing the patrols in a way he could partially understand. She gestured at their shapes, the sounds they made, the glow of their sensors. He nodded, storing the information for later, knowing it might be crucial for their next moves. For a time, they remained hidden, sharing silence broken only by the crunch of distant snow and the soft hiss of wind through the ridges. He offered her some bread and water again, reinforcing the sense that they were allies, not strangers. She took the food, eating carefully, her body relaxing slightly as the warmth and nourishment spread through her. Once the patrols passed, he gestured for her to follow him further along the ridge, toward a cave entrance he had noticed earlier. The cave was narrow and low, but it offered protection from the elements and potential pursuers. She hesitated at the entrance, glancing back toward the patrol's direction. Then, at him. He simply nodded, indicating that she could trust him. With a deep breath, She stepped inside, allowing the darkness to envelop them both. Inside, the cave was cold but sheltered. The fire from the hut had long since been left behind, and the human knew he would need to create a new source of warmth. He began gathering small stones and dry wood fragments that had blown into the cave entrance, arranging them carefully to ignite a small fire. The alien woman watched, fascinated by his method and patience. As the fire caught and light filled the cave, her alien features were illuminated in a warm glow. He could see the faint shimmer of her skin again, the intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story he could not yet read. She moved closer to the fire, her body warming slowly, her eyes reflecting both relief and lingering apprehension. They spent some time in the cave, sharing the small fire, sharing silent gestures of care. He demonstrated simple survival tasks, showing her how to gather water from a hidden pool nearby and how to maintain a fire with minimal fuel. She observed closely, sometimes imitating his actions, sometimes offering her own ways of handling the environment. Small abilities that hinted at her unique biology. Their trust continued to grow in these quiet moments. She began to rely on him for guidance and support, while he, in turn, began to understand her better. Not just her alien form, but her instincts, her intelligence, and her courage. He realized that despite her fear, she was not weak. She was resilient, clever, and observant. As evening approached, the temperature dropped again. The human shared more of the supplies he had brought, and she ate steadily, her trust in him strengthening with each passing hour. She no longer recoiled at his presence, and the small gestures of care were no longer met with suspicion. A bond, fragile but unmistakable, was forming. Then, a sound interrupted the quiet, a low, mechanical hum, different from the earlier patrols. Both froze, listening. The alien woman's body tensed, and she whispered in her language. He could not understand the words, but the tone was urgent. Warning. Something was approaching. He gestured for her to stay low, and together they moved deeper into the cave, seeking shadows and cover. The hum grew louder, echoing through the rock formations. The patrols, or perhaps another threat, were closing in. He quickly assessed the situation. They could either hide further or create a distraction to buy time. He reached into his pack and retrieved a small device, one he had designed for signaling or distraction. He activated it, sending a small burst of light and sound toward the entrance. The approaching patrols paused, investigating the anomaly, giving them precious moments to move silently deeper into the cave. She followed his lead without hesitation, finally trusting his judgment completely. By the time the threat passed, they had found a secure nook far inside the cave, hidden from sight and sound. The alien woman exhaled slowly, relief evident in her posture. She glanced at him, her eyes wide, and for the first time, he saw something beyond fear. Gratitude. He offered her a small piece of bread, and she accepted it with a quiet nod. Then, almost shyly, she extended a hand in his direction, a gesture of trust and acknowledgement. He took it carefully, holding it briefly before letting go, a silent promise that he would continue to protect her. The night fell fully outside, and the cave became a small sanctuary against the dangers of the frozen world. They sat near the fire, sharing warmth and food, communicating in gestures and simple sounds. Each moment strengthened their bond, a fragile alliance built on survival, trust, and mutual respect. For the first time, the alien woman allowed herself to relax fully. She leaned slightly toward him, not out of dependence, but out of recognition that he had become her ally. He understood the significance of the moment, the fragile trust that had taken hours to build. It was not friendship yet, not fully, but it was the beginning of something that could grow into it. Outside, the wind continued to howl softly, and the snow lay undisturbed across the landscape. Inside the cave, however, two beings from different worlds had found a moment of safety and connection. They were not just surviving. They were beginning to understand each other, to communicate without words, to share a purpose beyond mere existence. As they settled near the fire, the human glanced at the alien woman. Her eyes met his, and he could see the faint glow of her markings in the flickering light. There was intelligence, strength, and an unspoken question in her gaze. Could humans truly be trusted? Could she rely on this stranger who had saved her from the storm? He smiled softly, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. He could not answer her question in words, but his actions had already begun to do so. He had protected her, guided her, and treated her with care when the world outside was hostile. That was proof enough, he hoped, that she could trust him for now, and for whatever challenges lay ahead. In the quiet of the cave, they remained near the fire, a fragile alliance forming in the shadow of danger. The storm had tested them, forced them together, and created the opportunity for understanding. They were not yet friends, not yet partners, but they were no longer strangers. And as the night deepened, the alien woman began to feel something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that, perhaps, on this frozen, distant world, she had found not just safety, but an ally, a human who could be trusted, who could understand her, and who might help her survive the dangers yet to come. Morning came slowly, filtered through the narrow cave entrance in soft, pale light. The wind had calmed completely, and the snow outside sparkled under the weak sun. The world beyond the cave seemed quiet, almost peaceful. But the human and the alien woman knew better than to trust the calm entirely. Dangers still lurked, from the patrols that had been searching for her to the harsh environment itself. The human stirred first, checking the fire and ensuring it still burned steadily. He looked toward the alien woman, who had slept lightly, her body curled slightly for warmth. She opened her eyes and met his gaze. There was no fear now, only cautious awareness and a growing sense of trust. Their night together had forged a fragile connection, one born from survival and small acts of care. He gestured toward the cave entrance, indicating that it was time to move. She nodded, rising carefully, and wrapping the blanket around herself once more. The sun illuminated her features, highlighting the faint shimmer of her skin and the intricate markings that ran along her arms and shoulders. They were beautiful and mysterious, a reminder that she was not just another being in need of help, but someone extraordinary, someone from a world far different from his own. They stepped outside together, moving slowly across the icy ground. The blizzard had left the landscape transformed. Snowdrifts created strange shapes, and ice covered every rock and tree in a delicate, glittering layer. It was breathtaking, but the beauty was deceptive. The cold could kill, and any misstep could send them plunging into a hidden crevice. They kept close, watching each other, relying on silent gestures and shared awareness to navigate the frozen terrain. The alien woman paused for a moment, looking back at the cave. She touched the entrance lightly, as if acknowledging the shelter that had kept them alive through the storm. Then she turned to him, her eyes conveying more than words ever could: gratitude, trust, and something deeper, a recognition of the bond that had formed in the crucible of danger. He nodded, understanding completely. The storm had forced them together. But it was their actions, their care for one another, that had built the foundation of their alliance. As they moved along, she began to communicate more openly, using gestures and simple sounds. She pointed toward the distant horizon, then back to herself, indicating that she had been fleeing from something. The human nodded, acknowledging her story without needing details. He had learned enough. She was intelligent, brave, and resourceful, and she needed his help to survive. Their journey took them toward a narrow pass between two rocky ridges. The human led the way, scanning the area for threats. The alien woman followed closely, mimicking his movements and learning quickly how to navigate the treacherous terrain. Her initial fear had given way to cautious confidence, but he knew she would remain wary until they were truly safe. Suddenly, movement in the distance caught their attention. The patrol drones had returned, scanning the snow-covered landscape. The alien woman froze, her body tense with instinctive fear. The human raised a hand, signaling her to stay calm. He pointed to the ridge above them, suggesting higher ground that could provide cover. She nodded, trusting him completely, and together they moved with care, keeping low and using the natural formations of the terrain to remain unseen. From their hidden vantage point, they watched the drones pass below. The alien woman whispered softly, her voice carrying urgency and relief. Though he could not understand her words, the emotion was clear. She was grateful, and she was beginning to feel safe enough to share her thoughts and fears. He responded with a gentle nod, reassuring her without needing to speak. Once the drones were gone, they continued their journey. The alien woman pointed to a distant forest of crystalline trees, suggesting it might be a place to find shelter or safety. The human agreed, understanding that it was better than remaining exposed on the open ice. They moved cautiously, aware that any sudden movement could draw attention from predators or remaining patrols. As they approached the forest, she demonstrated a small ability he had noticed the night before. With a subtle gesture, she caused a faint glow to emanate from the markings on her skin, illuminating the path ahead. It was not a strong light, but enough to guide them through the shadowed areas of the crystalline trees. He marveled at the display, realizing that her abilities were not only beautiful, but could be incredibly useful in survival. They paused near the edge of the forest, taking a moment to rest. The alien woman handed him a small device she carried, explaining through gestures and simple sounds that it could detect movement or danger. He nodded, appreciating the gift and the trust it represented. They were no longer just two beings thrown together by circumstance. They were partners, allies in a harsh and unpredictable world. The forest provided shelter and protection. The crystalline trees shimmered softly in the daylight, casting delicate patterns across the snow-covered ground. The alien woman moved among them gracefully, showing familiarity and ease with the environment, while the human followed, learning from her instincts and careful movements. Together, they navigated the forest, finding a small hollow that could serve as a temporary refuge. Inside the hollow, they began to share more of their knowledge and skills. The human demonstrated simple survival techniques, gathering water from hidden streams, using fire safely, and rationing supplies. The alien woman contributed her own knowledge, teaching him how to sense subtle changes in the environment and how to avoid natural hazards that he might not detect. Their collaboration was seamless, a blend of human ingenuity and alien perception that allowed them to thrive in the harsh landscape. As the day progressed, they grew more comfortable with each other's presence. The alien woman no longer flinched at his movements, and he no longer treated her with cautious distance. Their interactions were natural, a balance of respect, care, and growing friendship. Small gestures, a shared piece of food, a helping hand over icy terrain, a reassuring glance built a connection that words could not fully express. In the quiet moments near the fire, she began to share fragments of her past. Using gestures and simple sounds, she indicated a mission gone wrong, a need to escape, and a hope for safety. He listened attentively, nodding and responding with gestures that conveyed understanding and support. He could not change her past, but he could ensure that the present and future offered safety and trust. As night fell, they prepared to rest. The alien woman curled near the fire, her glowing markings casting soft light across the hollow. The human sat nearby, maintaining the warmth and keeping watch. There was a sense of peace, a momentary truce with the dangers of the world outside. For the first time, the alien woman allowed herself to relax completely, her body and mind free from the tension of constant fear. Before sleep took them, she reached out and touched his arm lightly, a gesture of acknowledgement and trust. He returned the gesture, understanding its significance. She was no longer terrified of him. She trusted him. The bond between them had grown from fear and caution to mutual respect, understanding, and the beginnings of true companionship. They slept through the night in the hollow, safe for now, their shared experiences cementing a fragile but strong alliance. Outside, the world remained harsh. But inside the shelter of the crystalline trees, they had found a place of safety, warmth, and trust. When dawn came again, the alien woman stood and looked out at the forest, then back at the human. She gestured for him to follow, indicating that it was time to continue their journey. He nodded, knowing that together they could face whatever challenges awaited. The storm had tested them, the dangers had forced them to rely on each other, and now they were stronger for it. As they moved through the forest, the alien woman's glow illuminated their path, and he marveled at the harmony of their cooperation. She led, and he followed, each learning from the other, each trusting the other completely. They were no longer just a human and an alien thrown together by circumstance. They were a team, a partnership, forged in survival, trust, and mutual respect. By the time they reached a safe clearing, the alien woman paused and looked at him with an expression that spoke volumes. Gratitude, respect, and a hint of something deeper shone in her eyes. He smiled softly, nodding in acknowledgement. They had survived the storm, evaded danger, and discovered the beginnings of a connection that transcended their differences. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where humans were not only allies but friends, where trust could exist between species separated by worlds and experiences. The human, too, recognized the extraordinary nature of the being beside him, and he felt a sense of hope and possibility that he had not known before. Together, they looked out over the snow-covered landscape, the storm behind them, and the unknown ahead. The bond they had forged in the crucible of the blizzard was strong, and it would carry them through the challenges yet to come. In each other, they had found safety, understanding, and the first glimmer of friendship that could grow into something far greater. And in that quiet moment, under the pale light of dawn, two beings from different worlds, united by survival and trust, began a new journey not just across the frozen planet, but toward a deeper connection that neither had expected, yet both had found.